So, data engineering lab assignment number 2, lab assignment number 2 is understanding the requirements. It has subheadings as requirements from stakeholders, metrics and KPIs, columns and rows for the data sources, derived columns, and creating a data requirement specification documents. Tools to be used are templates, business requirement templates, data specification document. Let us look into this assignment. Understanding the requirement, in that the first item is gather business requirement from stakeholders. So, for any project to be initiated, so requirement needs to be collected from the stakeholders, and those stakeholders can be internal stakeholders like team members, department heads, management, or external stakeholders like clients, partners, or any external parties affected by the project. Once the stakeholders are identified for gathering the business requirement, stakeholder interviews are conducted with the help of questionnaires, and those questionnaires will be having list of business goals and expectations from the project. Open-ended questions clarify the need with the help of scenarios or examples, so that better understanding of the requirement happens. Even workshops or focus groups are conducted for requirement gathering. There can be collaboratory groups, workshops, online meetings to discuss the needs and expectations. There can be brainstorming sessions to identify challenges and potential solutions. Requirements can be prioritized and the stakeholders are helped in this prioritization. Document requirements. So, you can collect all the requirements in a formal document. Various templates are available, such as business requirement document. You can write use cases or user stories to illustrate how the system or solution will address the needs. Acceptance criteria can be defined for success. And once the requirements are gathered through these different means, the validations and confirmations are again done by giving to the stakeholder for review the same requirement documents, and for the accuracy, for completeness. Once that is done, get a formal sign off from the stakeholders, so that we can proceed with the project based on the document requirement. This is a freeze document requirement, as far as, because we have collected from the stakeholders and we have validated and took confirmation from the stakeholders. But it doesn't mean that it is the end. There should be a continuous communication through regular updates, feedback loops. So, with this approach, the project can meet the stakeholders' requirements properly. Coming to the second task, defining the key metrics and KPIs. KPI stands for key performance indicators. This is very much important for monitoring the success of a project or a business initiative. Now, how do I do this? First, I need to understand the business objectives. So, in that, I need to align the metrics and KPIs with the overall business objective. Say, for example, if the business goal is to increase customer satisfaction, the key performance indicator can be net promoter score or can be customer retention rate. Stakeholder inputs are important. Then to identify key requirements of measurements, we can take few examples. Say financial metrics are there. Financial metrics can be ROI, return on investment, can be profit margins, can be revenue, cost savings. Operational metrics can be resource utilization, process times, productivity, efficiency. Customer metrics can be customer satisfaction, retention, acquisition, engagement. Sales and marketing metrics can be customer lifetime value, conversion rate, lead generation, sales growth. Now, it is also important to select relevant KPIs. KPI stands for key performance indicator. Say, for example, KPI should be very clear and specific. For example, our goal is to increase sales. So instead of just mentioning the KPI as an increased sale, we can mention more specific KPI in the form of increased sales by 15% in the fourth quarter. KPI should be measurable quantitatively. Okay. Say for example, the KPI can be reduce the customer churn by 10%. They should be achievable, they should be relevant, they should be time bound. Next task is determining the data sources. Now the data sources can be internal data sources or the data sources can be external data sources. So we need to identify from which system, from which databases will be deriving the data for KPI calculations. If it is external data source, that can be market trend, third party analytics, which can be used for KPI calculations. Now we also need to define the KPI calculation methods. For example, there is something called as customer acquisition cost. This can be calculated with the help of total marketing expenses divided by the number of new customers acquired. Frequency you need to determine for KPI calculation measurement, whether it is daily, weekly or monthly. You need to set the benchmarks and targets. You can use past data for benchmarks or you can use some industry benchmark for KPI calculations. Now once you are done all that, so you need to document all the KPIs and communicate the KPIs, create a dashboard of KPIs, communicate the KPIs to all the stakeholders and review and adjust the KPIs frequently. So with this we come out with meaningful metrics and KPIs which will be providing clear insights about the performance and success of the project. Now coming to the third task, identification of the required columns and rows from each data source. Now we know every data source will be performing ETL operation, extract, transform, load. So from each data source we need to identify the required columns and rows. So how do I do it? So first I need to understand the business requirement, then I need to map metrics and KPIs with the requirement. So identify the relevant data, that is the data sources which contain that information which is required to calculate the KPIs and metrics. Review the data sources. If it is inventory data source, list out all the data sources, be it databases, spreadsheets, APIs. If it is data source structure, you need to understand the structure of the source including tables, fields and records. Identify the required columns. So you need to identify the required columns for KPI calculations. Say for example, sales data is there. You may require columns such as order ID, product ID, quantity, sales dates and revenue. Say customer data is there. You need columns like customer ID, customer name, customer segment, customer membership period. You need to also identify the metadata such as timestamps, location or status. You need to find out the columns required for join or merging the data from different sources such as customer ID or product ID. You may need to filter the rows based on criteria. The filter can be time period such as last quarter or a specific data range. Filter can be a geographical location. Filter can be a business segment. Filter can be a exclusion criteria. You also need to create a data mapping document. So data mapping document will be having the source table, the required columns, filter criteria, transformation rules. So all these selections of columns and rows you need to again validate with the stakeholders. For that reviews need to be performed, post brainstorming, post discussion, adjustments need to be made depending on the feedback. Now after that we need to implement the ETL process. ETL stands for extract, transform and load. Okay, so that can be done through tools or script or SQL queries or API calls. So post that you need to run the test extractions so that will be pulling out the correct data which is good for the business requirement. Now, once we are done with that, we need to determine any derived columns needed for analysis. So what is the meaning of derived column? The columns which are not directly available. Now how do I get the derived columns? I can get the derived columns maybe like this. Some calculations which may require some existing columns. Say for example, I may be performing this calculation like profits. This may be a derived column and it may require some other columns and revenue, cost, conversion rates and so on. I may aggregate fields. I may aggregate few columns to come out with a new derived column. Say for example, I may aggregate the sales amount group by month and come out with a new derived column called as total sales per month. I may format the field. Say for example, I may be concatenating the full name which is derived from first name and last name concatenation. So various categories like database fields, categorical fields are there for derived columns. Again, we need to work with the stakeholder to define the custom derivations. For complex metrics calculations such as customer retention rate or churn rate, we need to work closely with the stakeholder so to ensure derivation are aligning with the business definitions. We need to determine the transformation logic for creating the derived columns. For example, I need to calculate net sales. So net sales should be, this is the formula for net sales. We need to specify how to handle the null or missing data. So you need to document all those derived columns by mentioning the column name, the calculation or the formula used, the source column used, the example values used. Now after once we have derived the columns and documented them, we can implement them in the ETL process and validate them for accuracy. So once you are done, again review with the stakeholder for validation, make necessary adjustments. So for optimized performance, make use of indexing and storage, make use of efficiency. So ultimately, what is expected in this requirement gathering is you are supposed to create a data requirement specification document. It is, you can correlate with this the requirement document, SRS document of software engineering life cycle. So there is a sample template here. You can have a data requirement specification document like this. It has project name, prepared by, date, version, purpose, business objectives, data sources, data requirements, required columns and rows, derived columns, their details, transformation rules, quality requirements, compliances, security, storage and archiving, integration and reporting, validation and testing, stakeholder review and approval, appendix. So this is one such template. So with this we try to understand the second lab assignment of data engineering lab called as understanding the requirement.